my background is I climbed the ladder as an equity stage manager. I got out of college, did the intern thing, did crafty little shows down in the village, did some fringe festivals, worked my way up to off-Broadway and some Broadway and tours, and then I made a left and got married and got my master's and started teaching it. And along that journey, I was a teaching artist who, with the Roundabout, and we created the Page to Stage program. I do recognize you. And in that, what was beautiful about that is I was able to translate a lot of the stage management skills to the classroom. And then when I got this tech program, I was really able to organize the shows in the way that eventually I would be able to hand over power to the students. And I use the word power very loosely, because we're going to talk about what that looks like, right, in the room. So, just looking at my notes here, when I do that, moving into like the meat of this, when I am starting a production, and when I did this professionally as a stage manager, and when I do it in a school, I break the production down into 4 phases. You start with your 4 phases, and the first phase is pre-production, right? That is what you're doing to get ready to go into rehearsal. The second phase is rehearsal. The third phase is tech. The fourth phase is performance, production, your run, right? And feel free to take notes, but I also have a little bit of a cheat sheet over here on the window, right? So in pre-production, and I'm only going to speak about my experiences on the high school level, because then I will ask you guys to break out on your levels with your students and make these lists for yourself. But what does pre-production look like? And shout out at me if you have anything that you do specifically during pre-production that I might be missing from my list. Pre-production is when we choose the play. We cast the play, right? Once we have those students, we check their schedules. We make sure there are no conflicts, or we work through those conflicts. We create the contact sheets. We break down the scripts for lights, right? Lighting cues. When do we need blackouts? When do we need lights up? We break down the scripts for what kind of sets we need. We make the prop list. We create a costume breakdown. We create our sounds lists, right? And you could do all of these or you could do none of these, and it's all okay. It's your process. This is my process. Prepare the prompt book, right? And the prompt book for kids to understand is this really advanced idea, but they get there. And if you start small, you build it, right? Create a calendar. Just as sort of off the top of my head, things we do to pre-production to get ready for that first rehearsal, because we're not there yet. We alert the kids, we get everybody together, we hand out scripts, and we have our rehearsal. We are switching phases, and I'm really going to encourage you to think about the theater process in phases, right? The theater building or the theater making process. Second phase is rehearsal, and a lot of us say that's the meat of our work. But what are you, as teachers, doing during the rehearsal process? You are obviously rehearsing, blocking, directing the show, but you're taking attendance. You're organizing the props and the sets and the costume pieces that the kids need to rehearse with. You're making sure that they all come back at the end of the day. You're managing behavior. You are asking this one to go work with this one, and you are asking this one to pick up the spill off the floor, right? You're doing all that. You are also hoping that the kids write down their blocking, or you are taking the blocking, or you are taking your own notes. And then I just want to emphasize the idea of the communicating that needs to be done during a rehearsal process. Obviously, in the professional world, we have a very regimented way to do that, and that's rehearsal reports. So if you are able to start with rehearsal reports, do you do them here?
We haven't since before times, but we're actually just going back to it on this show.
Right.
We just reset that.
Right, because we're so automated now, and like a lot of it is through the computer, that it's really easy to bring it up, fill it in, and then you disseminate it, and it's a really nice way to get information across. So rehearsal reports, we'll come back to that. Okay, you're at rehearsal. Your show opens in a week. All the kids are going to stay after school now. Again, my experience in a high school. So we are moving into tech, and I am very specific with the kids that this is a new phase of production. We are moving into the tech phase in which we are bringing all the tech elements together. We are tired, we are staying late, we are hungry. We get that, right? You're gonna ask the crew to now join you. So you now have 20 more kids that you didn't have to manage the last time. So we have to train the crew for tech. Make sure the theater is safe and sanitary, which in these days takes on a whole new meaning. But safety, right? Who in your buildings, in your theater processes, who is in charge of safety? Just out of curiosity, like is it you? Right, or no one, right? Which is valid. We run scene changes, we run costume changes, we introduce things, we are stopping and going and getting through the show with all those elements in place. Costume fittings, we are putting cues in the prompt book, we are training the lighting, the light board operator and the soundboard operator. Maybe they've done it before, maybe they have not, but this is all part of your tech process. Moving into performance, I sometimes do it myself, I sometimes have a student do it, or we don't do it at all, we call the show. We all know what that means. Do I need? Okay. Run backstage, run the pre-show checks, run the post-show checks, make sure everything is back together. Then we make sure our crew chiefs, we're on top of our crew chiefs, who's in charge of props, who's in charge of sets, who's in charge of all these things, checking in with them. And obviously, we make sure this show goes, right? We make sure actors are in place. When it's time to start the show, we make sure the crew's in place when it's time to start the show, and we make sure that everything happens well. It's a huge job, right? Like, that's a lot. It's a lot for us. It's a lot for one person. It's a lot for the adults in the room. What I'm going to challenge you to think about today is how do we disseminate these jobs to our students? And how do we set up with the student our very clear understanding of what the job is? So, to that end, what I'm going to ask you guys to do, and I will ask you, I didn't take time to do introductions, but please introduce yourselves in your small groups. I have set up a chart for elementary in the corner by the fridge. I've set up a chart for middle school by the window, on the couch with the high schoolers. And I set up a high school corner over here. So if you will gather with your grade team, let's say, and what I'm going to ask you to do, I put a marker there, have a scribe available, or have a scribe volunteer, brainstorm, right? Let's do a brain dump of what pre-production looks like in your world. What does it look like on the elementary school level? Because I know it looks different than high school level. What does tech look like in your school, in your building, right? And you might have a bunch of different answers in that category, and that's fine. But what are the jobs that need to get done during tech, during pre-production, during rehearsal, during performance? We have about 10 minutes to sort of brainstorm, but very much let this be a brain dump, right? All the things. Order pizza. Someone has to do it, right? Because the kids are staying late. Sweep the floor. You got to remind somebody to do it, right? All the little things. Get it out of your brain. Let's get it on paper. And take a minute to bounce off of the people in your group. Questions? Great. 10 minutes.
If I keep them after school. A lot of them can't stay after school. And some of the really great actors and actresses can't stay after school.
Or they already have things.
Yes, and it's like we're all fighting over 20 kids, and everybody wants them in a program. So it's
Sounds about right. So probably pre-production is like figuring out when rehearsals will be, right? Whether it's in school or after school.
or a hybrid.
Or a hybrid.
And I guess that would also be trying to collaborate with other teachers to see, hey, can I steal them this period? Because lunch is not enough.
Yeah.
And the theater class, I don't know if you guys have the same kids every single day. Some classes I only have like once a week.
Yeah.
So
At my school, we usually do the pre-production has a lot to do with honestly like casting, consent forms, adaptations of any kind.
say the last thing.
Adaptations, like if there's anything we need to adjust. Legally, of course.
Did you say adaptations or?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like a rehearsal schedule of some kind. You definitely need to have that sketched out before.
So if it's in class, then for me it's rubrics. How does it line up with the marking period? Which things are graded assignments?
That's
One of my kids did say that. They said if I told them
No, it's just that my entire curriculum is production in class.
Oh.
So we don't have any after school rehearsals. So in order to translate that to are we meeting standards and what are the grades, then everything has to be integrated
Same.
with like unit plans. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot. I wonder how that works for like during testing too.
Yeah, you can't schedule a performance or production anywhere near state testing. Is that what you mean?
Or just period, just testing those weeks that are off, that throw the whole school day off.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that's hard, especially like March, April. And for us, I know we have like that science test, whatever, in June. A couple like advanced regions for some of our 8th graders that are in honor classes, like that grades us off. Like, we can't do time like that.
And also the breaks too in February.
and April.
Yeah.
So like maybe hearing for
Just the
interruptions.
calendar.
Getting
Yeah.
student preferences.
What do you mean by that?
So like that's a part of casting for me. Since it's in school, everyone has to be involved. So it's not just like you cast the play. It's like who wants to be on, who's interested in stage managing, or even within the parts, who's interested in ensemble or.
So if it's in school, I'm just curious, do you have a certain period where
You have everyone
you
together.
only, yeah, you have everyone together because you have your classes during the day, right? Do you,
The classes are different casts.
but do you have a period where it's like the whole cast is there?
As in, you can't cast, the production can't be across classes.
So each class has its own production.
So like the 8th graders, I have 2 8th grade classes and they do, like this year they're doing Macbeth, so it's 2 separate casts. Because there is no rehearsal time together. And the 6th and 7th graders are doing Peter and the Starcatcher, it's gonna be 3 separate casts.
Oh, so you're doing the show several times.
Yeah.
So
But
you have
that's,
3
but you know what,
nights of
that's
performances.
actually, that's
There's
actually
no
not
after
bad.
school rehearsal.
Because I'm in a 3K to 8 school, and I'm using 5th graders and 8th graders, and everybody wants to be everything. So that's actually maybe a good idea, because we do 2 shows, like a Friday show and a Saturday show. Maybe we could just do multiple
Yeah, it helps
shows.
with understudies too. I found in middle school, especially in COVID times, it's like, well, now I've got 2 understudies for every part.
That's
You can
awesome.
also give understudies jobs backstage, so they're not bored when they're not on.
I worked at a charter school that everybody had to be involved. It was K to 5, but it was 2 different. It was Annie we did, and it was 150 students in one class, 150 in another one. Oh my gosh! Yeah.
About 5 minutes to brainstorm. We'll come back to conversations. They've built in time for conversations. So
For rehearsal, I think it's at least for us.
we don't have a TikTok. I built in time to try. In person. Building permits for all of us.
Oh yeah. Building what? Building permits. Building permits. Okay. I was like building.
About 5 minutes, guys. So just keep throwing your ideas up there and
Also location, because we work in an elementary school building, so finding location. So it's either the cafeteria, we're gonna reconvert the gym, we're just trying to find location.
When we're rehearsing, designer runs kind of interchange. So one day we'll do scripts, one day we focus on music, one day we focus on blocking.
What's a designer run?
So like you invite like the costume department in to watch run-throughs or head of tech ahead before we even get into the theater.
It's like a production before rehearsal.
So the tech department will come in and watch runs ahead of time.
If you're looking at the tech department,
Yes.
you know, like there's the understanding that we're in all levels.
For the rehearsal, I'd say the scene breakdown, just kind of going over with your team.
We did our first Arabian Nights, so I did like 20 minutes of music and then we start the dance. And then the next rehearsal, we will sing through it once, do the dance, and then we'll block the scene into or after.
I mean, as someone who is a one-man tech show, I have a lot of production meetings that are during the rehearsals as opposed to during pre-production, because that's when the director can actually formalize what they want.
Right, they're recording, yes. So, yeah, last year was my first time.
Are you guys doing anything during the performance? Like the show is going on, are you sitting watching? Are you
Backstage, running
around backstage? Right, so like throw that in there.
Tickets,
What?
concessions.
Front of house, absolutely.
By the time we transition from tech into performance, I have to leave the show in the kids' hands because I have to deal with the parents. So I become head of front of house and they keep it together. Somehow, by some miracle, every time.
That's why I went to theater.
I do a lot of looming.
Looming.
Right.
Like every kid's got a job and they all have their jobs, and I'm just like hovering so that I can over their shoulder.
Right. I feel like we make a very formalized ritual of it, that right before we open, I in essence turn the production over to the AD and the student stage manager, and they're usually 2 honor students who are seniors, and it's no longer my show.
Which on the high school level, and especially if your kids are really interested in pursuing this as a career, there is the understanding that the director leaves on opening night. The designers are gone. The show is now in the hands of the stage manager, which is where I'm
And I'll
entering the
stop giving notes
conversation.
unless something goes disastrously off kilter. But I stop giving notes after the last dress, and it has to grow in their hands. Like they have to take responsibility for it.
And those live theater moments, if something goes wrong, are so educational.
Right.
They will remember and learn from
How long are your runs?
It depends. If we do a black box run, we'll sometimes run for 2 weeks because we're seating so many few. But when we work upstairs, we usually do 4 or 5 performances, depending on the show. But yeah, I miss the day. Honestly, I miss the days of being in old Tiny Beacon, where our black box was so tiny. We did every show 10 times, and it was so much more rewarding for them to do 2 full weekends of 5 performances each, because they got to sleep on the week between, and the second weekend was always just magic.
For me, like once I turn the show over, you know, my primary job, our only job left is safety, because I'm the one really responsible for safety. I can say the stage manager is responsible for safety, but everyone knows it's me.
I had a similar experience in turning the show over. We used to do it live, but after the pandemic, the administration wanted a movie musical. So there's been a lot of benefits to that, but also for me to just let the cinematographer take over and go, okay, I have to trust the process and let my ego go and let it go. So it's similar, doing a film, it's interesting, it's a different switch for tech. You rely more on tech, more on cinematography.
Depending on the show, I have to, like the day before tech, teach a kid how to call the show. Because they've not been taught how to do it, because they're a member of
the stage management.
Well, they might be a member of the cast that is not performing that day. So they're an A cast, and they're calling B cast, and vice versa.
That's terrifying.
That's what I was
I'm going to ask us all to finish up conversations. You don't have to move very far, but just come where we can. Stage crew. You can join combine ideas, combine forces.
It's my favorite
Because
thing.
I'm curricular, so
How
I
on earth do you do the dance visit with kids?
My elementary group, are you wrap up just and then we'll come back. We're gonna break off again.
Everything else.
Middle school. So I just want to thank you for engaging in these conversations. I think there is such community in the release of I'm not the only one who has to do everything, and oh, your school has to deal with that too. But I've heard a lot of great things around. And the next thing I want to ask you to do is use these lists that you just created as a group, and for yourself. Absolutely, you're going to bounce off your colleagues. Just identify one or two of those jobs that you can delegate down. And what I mean by that is you find a student who happens to be good at X, and you give them the job that is related to what they're good at, right? And it's a very simple job. I'm not saying they are going to organize all the costumes yet, but maybe they can do the sizing for you. Maybe they can hold on to the Excel spreadsheet for you. Maybe they can, if you are allowed to do this, take out their cell phone and call their friend who's late. Give them the attendance, right? So what I want you to do is take a look at this list for yourself and identify where in this list you can think about your own kids and figure out what can I give away? What can I just take off my plate and put it on theirs? And I know it's a simple task. I just know that we do not have time during the process to think about this. So I'm hearing that many of you are, I know in high school we are at the break and we are going into a production. Mine started 2 weeks ago, so we are at the point where hopefully today we could take that time and say, oh yeah, this child will be good at organizing props because they have an impeccable background. I don't know. But you know your kids and you know what they excel at. And find something on this list that matches their strength. Another 10 minutes, feel free to have a conversation about it. But again, I want to encourage you to think about your own kids. Make this personal.
I think organizing. I think a nice little couple of letters to him.
Right?
I love it.
That is true.
I think making it constant. I think making it constant.
We want this.
Yeah, like I said, it's hard when you're thinking of specifics, but what specific task could they make? Like last year, I had them make 2 things. That was it. But the crew got to make a certain thing for costumes.
A lot of what I do is looking in the fridge and seeing what I have. Like, what kids are in the fridge? What can I cook? And a lot of it is, if there's a kid that's good at spreadsheets, sure. But if there's not that year, then I don't have that kid. But if, I like to assess where all the kids are in class. And so we did something new this year. I had younger kids in the beginning of the year. Now I have older kids. So I'm going in this as also learning at where they're at now, even though I've taught them since kindergarten. But it's a lot picking jobs. I feel like the jobs are them. They're going to gravitate towards what they want to do, and I can't force them.
So let's go back to this. So auditions. So I think their students can help with bringing the kids in, and there could be someone in the hallway when the students are, in that part. They don't have to be in the room with the auditions, but they can be on the outside.
I tape my auditions.
You do?
So that when parents ask me
Why did
I
get
didn't
this role?
get this
Why
role,
did my child get this role?
See, I didn't know if
I
you
go,
could do
well, what
that.
would you do?
I have a rubric, so I give them the rubric.
And then you show them the audition.
Right? That's a great idea.
You film the auditions?
Wow. I did a panel this year too of other teachers and stuff.
And you can flip through it.
Scenery.
Wow.
Right,
Yes,
you
you can.
Whoa, I love that.
Something I learned during COVID.
The kids don't mind watching each other's auditions either.
No. And then they can, give each other feedback and use it, make it a
I
teacher.
will also say is putting it on Flipgrid something you can hand over to your kid.
You could.
How I know right, and I know that there's like limitations with what you share. but-
Elementary school, I don't know if you guys have, ours have like done away with emails, so like none of the kids know their emails.
I just had the biggest.
We don't know, yeah.
Yeah, so we'll see.
Just in looking at your list, I mean, and again, you know the elementary level, but I wonder, you know, can someone write the letter to recruit parent volunteers? Can someone be in charge of, or can someone keep the list of the costume changes, or keep track of moving scenery, right? That's one kid who sits next to you, and every time you know a scene change is coming, you get to nudge them, and that kid has the job of running on stage, right? So it's, you're setting up a crew. You have a tech team, you said, right?
I also find the bossiest girl.
Absolutely. I mean,
Last year I picked someone who was a little quieter though, and
took off.
Yeah.
I like teaming them, you know, like the bossy and the, but stage managers, they, and we'll talk about it in a minute, but you endow them with that title, they
go around
right, so, right, but what does that look like, right? So you keep the time, that's all, even if that's all they have to do.
You also have assistant choreographer who can be a child, like
Absolutely, right.
Yes.
Right.
Again, all of these you can have a kid. It's just when also you can get them to work with you. Like you say you have a period, you do after school. I have after school 1 day a week writing. That's it.
see, that's what, yeah, I had to like advocate for it because I was having the crew come to me during lunch, and then I wasn't getting good commitment because they were missing their recess time. So then I was like, I need a period for my crew kids, or I need to do it after school. And they were like, well, we don't have the budget for you to do it in after school. So I was like, then I need a period. So that's kind of how I like kept fighting for it because I wasn't gonna get it.
I'm supposed to have a rehearsal period, but again, it's the time too. Like I'm not gonna like kill myself trying to get kids to do my jobs if I can just do it real quickly because I'm on a time budget.
Yeah.
And
That's very true, but also, you know, delegation does help.
It
with,
does. It does.
With things like that, you know, so I really like this. I'm really going back with, but the thing is, I don't have extra students. So all of my students are active.
In the cast.
So it will have to be a matter of when you're not on stage or when this is not your scene, you're
It
gonna
could also
help.
be any of the kids that didn't get into the play. You know, there could be the list of the kids.
I took all of them.
Yeah. Sometimes we don't. I'm just saying for those that don't take everyone, that's there could be their jobs to do it. It doesn't always happen if you have a like amount of kids that you take away.
So I'll have someone.
But you can even have kids who are not on stage who have very small parts assist you when you're sitting in the chair.
A lot of ensemble, right?
Ensemble, would, you know, and they'll be happy because they have like extra roles to do. You want to give those kids an extra chance, and they'll be so excited. Oh, you want to be the assistant? You want to be, you know, somebody who's in the dance? Be like, you're my assistant choreographer,
Right?
you know, or you know,
Absolutely.
and we can do the cost. So we can write. I have to say, stagehands. And just you have your. I have a person with a curtain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that is so important.
Oh yeah, I have a curtain person.
Whiteboard operator. Sound cue, like.
This is my question though. Are y'all letting them, like again, I want them to feel, there's a lot of artsy kids, drawing kids, crafty kids who want to do that aspect. But again, last year I feel like we did a little bit of it and then they all ended up just being a run crew. Like,
The artsy
you know,
kids? I did something new this year with Instagram. I made them all make a flyer for Lion King, and then I posted on Instagram. Nice. And that way they got validated for what they did in class for making a promotional poster. They had to all put the date, all put, you know, understand the elements.
They get to use different ones then? They would just use
Every day I'd post it on Instagram. Just, we're having this show, parents, we're having this show.
I'm trying to find ways, like, yeah, those kids who are more like want to do that aspect, how to keep that later in the process, right? Not just have be like, okay, you wanted to be a costume person, but now you're just going to do the curtains.
Right.
You know? To still feel like they're getting a more creative outlet.
But that is,
well, Instagram is also fun. Listen,
And every once in a while it goes to kind of it happens. My friend group leaves the department out once, and I'm like, okay, I have no one in costumes who can sew a button on. We need to start that one over, but that's rare. Like I feel like the teams are really taking care of themselves as we move forward.
Is this an audition school?
I was really like so shocked because I actually did not go backstage at all for this first production last 2 weeks ago, and we did like in class when I give them their grades back, they tell me how it was, and I like was so moved to know like backstage they kept saying everyone was so supportive, and I was like, really? Like I usually like have to go back and like force them to do that, but maybe I was doing that because I had this preconceived notion from my high school experience like that it wasn't supportive, but that was naturally how they work. Like these are all, I don't teach, we're not a specialized high school, so I teach students who want to do everything, but they all like snap together for that moment, and I don't know, they have a great respect for the process and for everything about the organization.
Gosh, that's wonderful.
I have questions for y'all who have been doing this. It's my first year teaching, and it's a brand spanking new program, so I'm starting from absolute scratch. They've never had a theater teacher before. We have no resources, nothing. Thank you. So I'm just like, did you jump in and there was already an existing program where you're like, yeah, here's our sound, they already know all this stuff?
When I started at the old Beacon School, I was hired by Meryl Streep's little brother to start a theater program where there wasn't one.
Cool.
We had one stage light, a closet full of junk.
Yep, that's what I got right now.
And he was an empty room, and he just said, don't you think we can put a black box in here? And I could not say no to him. He was the most charismatic and magical man in the universe. You remember.
He did a whole dance performance for us when he was on crutches.
Yeah, like he really, he chose me, I don't know why, I'm so grateful, but we just converted an old empty room into a black box, and the rest is kind of history. But we like many schools, started with next to nothing. And my very first play, I directed The House of Blue Leaves because I loved the play, and Margot Martindale's daughter was in it, and she came to see it, and she said, you're actually teaching acting. You keep focusing on that, and the rest of it will come. And I just did what I knew how to do, which was teach playwriting and teach acting, and one little parent connection at a time, we grew a non-existent program into this building. But it took an army. Like it's not. I feel like there's this weird vibe that people think Beacon has a lot of money or that we have excess resources, and that is absolutely false. We're just really good at taking other people's resources, like other people's garbage, built our program. It's all donations, leftovers, and honestly picking trash.
Just a quick check-in. I'm hearing a lot of conversations that are sort of leaning towards this, and you've jumped to it already. But as we've all discovered in our conversations, giving the student a title, endowing them with the title. You are the costume head. You are the light board operator. You are the head engineer. You are the house manager. Those titles, especially I found on the middle school level, I can only imagine on the elementary level, endow the kids with the quote-unquote power that we have been talking about all day, right? So as you finish these conversations, what are those jobs? What are those titles? I heard someone say assistant director. You work up to assistant director, right? You don't start as one. Maybe you start as a crew, and then a crew chief, and then a backstage manager, and then an assistant director. I have a little visual of hierarchy that I'll set up and show you. But think of, as you're sort of moving about these conversations, and if anybody wants to jot them, what are the titles that you can give your students? So far I've heard stage manager, I've heard assistant director, I've heard wardrobe head, I've heard assistant choreographer, assistant stage manager, right? Think of what your students want to be called. What will make them feel like they have the responsibility, because they will rise to that responsibility. So in your notes, on your sheets, give it a title. And then we're going to come back in about 5 minutes.
I mean, dance captain.
Dance captains are you?
Like when you're teaching, so your classes are specifically like production, like you're teaching like the production in your class, correct? So like, do you like at my school like I have like I teach 6th, 7th, and 8th musical theater elective because we have 3 elective 9 elective periods a week, so each period gets 3. But then I have like I'll teach like general theater classes up to 7th grade. So like for me, I feel like to do like I would love to do stuff in the classroom and then bring it into after school, but it's like almost impossible because for me it's almost impossible because I am teaching like general classes. Like I have we have this program called Nest at our school, so I have 2 Nest classes, and then I have 2 12 to 1-to-1 classes. I have about 4 health classes. I have so many kids that I'm reaching, so I see almost about 440 kids a week. So it's like a lot. So like I can't imagine doing 6
that's why
different
it's just like
tasks.
not even relevant to my experience, because
Right.
I feel like what's hard is actually the things that are hard in the classroom, like engaging every student. And like sure, you can be the wardrobe specialist, but how is that relevant to all of the like rehearsals up until you add costumes?
Right.
It's not. You can't. You're just sitting there.
Right.
So you can't just be the wardrobe specialist because you're called to every class.
Right.
You know, it's not just like, oh, you come in at this stage in the process.
And
so then everyone is multiple roles.
Right.
And I guess I've sort of come to like some default roles I have. It's like if your character is like not in what we're running today, then you can choose. And there's like a couple of menus of like options that are always available. So like you can think about the design of the scene like as it's happening, even if that doesn't end up being the design for the show. It's like an exercise that you can do while the rehearsal's happening, or you can get a feedback form and you're like assistant director for every day, but it's really that you're giving feedback on a specific skill set to the actors. So like at the top of the form it'll say skill focus, and you can choose from like circle 1, and then like actor that you're observing, and you can write in their name, and then like a glow and a glow.
Just to make them like part of what's going on.
And then you can give someone like understudy so that they're like observing part.
And how many kids are there?
30.
Do they sign up to be a part of your class, or they're?
I mean, they have to take an elective.
Okay.
So I would say that like the struggle is that every class has like 20 to 25 students who like are really into it, and then 5 to 10 students who are like
just not
into it. And so the hard part for me is like those students. And I get like, you know, they love, when we get to tech, it's great, because then there are so many more jobs. And it's like, oh great, these 3 kids are on sound, and these 2 kids, but like that person just doesn't have a job when you're qualified.
Right. Sorry, I didn't mean to derail, but I'm just trying to like.
I'm actually talking today because I was like, oh, I'm going to do your idea. Then I was thinking, wait a minute, she talked about some negative.
Well,
I'm glad that I'm thinking that you're sharing what you do in those spaces. I think that I kind of made it like romanticized. I was like, oh, because my kids don't get to choose. They just are pushed into the So it's like, man, if we had it as electives and kids could choose, they would love it. And it's to hear your story that some kids still are like, I'm just here.
Well, there's always those kids who just don't even want to be at school at all, right? So,
I mean, this is what it must be a kind of second guessing what after school rehearsals look like. If they're, I guess, longer than typically than a lesson might be. So like, there must be an imperative when you're teaching in a lesson to kind of hit the ground running and get progress very, very quickly. Whereas it can be a little bit more organic and just organising things out of school and things can develop at a different pace.
well, it's that there's like a combination of all these different pressures. There's like the production, but then there's also like I might get observed at any moment, or like what's the learning objective for today. And so you can't just have like in an after school. You could have someone's waiting on something, but you can't have them waiting on something.
Especially if you're being observed on student engagement.
So,
Well, I guess I would make that assistant director in the context of teaching in the class isn't necessarily something that you've worked your way up to over several years. It's like an option of a menu of things that you could be doing if you're not on stage right now. Yeah.
Maybe it's good to have those options as well. Like, we're trying to teach our kids to be engaged in all aspects of theater. Maybe one day I'm lifting and I'm doing stage crew. Maybe another day I'm assisting to see what that feels like. You're getting a chance to feel out different jobs.
Right.
Because that is one of the standards, like thinking about theater as a real job.
Right.
So you get a chance to do this process to do really good.
And if you're not on stage, then you're definitely helping track props, or you're like moving, making transitions happen. Like Lady Macduff, who's a big part but only in the second half, runs the sound for the first half. And so it's not like demarcated roles, it's like what are you doing during this time in the show?
And then it's the fairness aspect to it. Well, how did they get that? And I have to be this role the whole time. I never get to switch.
So I'm going to ask this to come back for a minute. Again, we'll break off into our conversations because I'm getting the sense that they're helpful and we want to continue. Just to share, this is a PowerPoint I did a while ago for a very specific stage management workshop. But I call this the people in our neighborhood, and it is a hierarchy breakdown of a professional theater company. So starting with the producer and breaking down to the director and the production manager, and then I heard the word dramaturg. Asking someone to be the dramaturg is just such a for that kid who can't find their place in your show and is not quite a performer but is very academic. The idea of making them the research captain and holding the information, the world of the play in their hands and having kids go to them to ask questions is just brilliant. So I'll leave this up here, but if you scroll down one more time, I made my own version, who are the people in our neighborhood at rep, right? We have who's our producer? Our producer's our principal. Who's our production manager? Who's the director? Who's the production manager? It's usually me. Who do we go to for different things? And this sets up the idea that there are jobs, there is a hierarchy, a power structure, and you are now a part of it, right? So I would take this further and say, your student stage manager is this person. Then their assistant stage manager in charge of blocking is this person. Their assistant stage manager in charge of whatever. Moving down, you are a crew chief. Who does the crew chief answer to? The stage manager. Who does the stage manager answer to? Me, right? So establishing that everybody has a job to do, everybody is in charge of something, and then we move up the chain of command as it is done professionally. But then also having them understand that students work their way up. That's a big thing for me when a student comes in and says, I want to be this. And I say, okay, have you been this yet, right? And as Joanne and I were talking about before, seniors graduate, and you want those seniors to teach those freshmen, right? So if you have a senior who's a board op, that year they should be bringing in an apprentice, someone who wants to learn the board, someone who wants to learn how to run crew or costumes or sew or whatever it is. So when we talk about, and feel free to scroll up and down, but just giving credit, Matt Kaiser is the man who did the other way. Did this very fancy hierarchy, and we were also talking before, he has a brilliant website where kids literally play with lights on the website. So just a resource for you. And then take this and make it your own, right? Make it fit in your school building. Now, along with power, what we want to talk about today is setting up the expectations. So what does it look like to be a crew chief? What does it look like to be a wardrobe head? What are the things that I, as the teacher, I, as the director, I, as the production manager, am expecting from you? So just to, I'm going to ask you to do this for yourself, but just to throw it out there, what were some of the job titles that you came up with in your groups?
This is one that I hadn't heard, but wanted to ask a room of people who know. Would company manager be a good title for the student that's really good at tracking what all the jobs are and who has been? Okay.
Yeah, company manager is a great one. Company manager professionally means you are making sure the actors are happy, right? So I had and again, very important with like safe and sanitary and making sure they get paid. But the idea of that in a school, what can that look like? What can a company manager look like in a school situation? Throw it out to me. What are some jobs? Yeah.
Maybe like voicing student concerns, like to you as a teacher.
I heard the word deputy. Our stage managers know like that a deputy would come to us. So yes, being the voice of the cast, that's great, because many times the cast don't want to come to you, but there's this one kid who will speak for everybody. It's a great job to give them. Yeah.
The new theater role of the COVID safety protocol.
COVID safety protocol, yes.
Perfect for company manager.
That would be perfect for company manager. Here's the I'll be backstage with the sanitizer. Other ideas? What can we give? How do we endow a company manager with with a list of expectations that they will fulfill as the show goes on? Maybe they're the one who disseminates like the paperwork. They're the one who, instead of the stage manager, they're the one who make the phone calls when someone's late.
Yeah, I was gonna say attendance would be good for company
Yeah,
manager.
definitely. Let's come up with another one. Maybe in the elementary, did you guys find a title that you can give any of your students?
Oh yeah, we have a lot of.
Give me one. I want to brainstorm together.
PR, social media.
Social media or PR manager, right? That's fantastic. So in my school, we sort of wrap that up into front of house. There's like this whole front of house category. But let's talk about, so as the PR manager or social media manager, what are we asking them to do? What is the job? Anyone?
Collect imagery.
Okay, so take pictures, collect image.
Make a flyer.
Make a flyer.
Design tickets.
Design the tickets.
Run the student Instagram.
Run the student Instagram. What else?
Make announcements.
Definitely, yes. Be the voice. Be the face of the show. Just jot all these down as people are throwing them out. That's great. Others? Other ideas for the PR social media manager? Are they the person who is actually collecting tickets, or do we want to put that into another?
I would think house manager.
That could be the house manager, right? So endowing the student as a house manager. Obviously, there's always a teacher who has to be there when money is changing hands. But the house manager, I asked the house manager to train the ushers. I also have the house manager be waiting with the mop and the broom for when a spill inevitably happens backstage or on stage. What else? What else are we asking the house manager to do?
ADA assistance.
Absolutely. Assisting if there's a handicap or a need for an elevator, any sort of ADA. Anything else?
I mean, reporting to you or the stage manager about like how many people are here, do we need to hold house?
Are we waiting?
Like that.
Yeah, and that is one of those jobs that they are in charge. They love that because literally the power of starting the show, and they love the idea of what you said, handing over, right? I'm giving you the show, you can begin now. For a house manager is, and especially a shy kid who hasn't really felt their place yet, they have a place. Okay, anything else?
Programs given,
Absolutely.
the ushers and making sure everybody has a
Taking care of programs, tallying them, handing them out, collecting them off the floor when the show's over. Okay, yeah?
Question, this hasn't come up, and I wonder if the physical boundaries becomes an issue. Hair and makeup?
It's great. I mean, yes. So I always, so there is a costume crew and then there is the hair and makeup crew. We just did Shrek. We had 2 students who were the only 2 students allowed to touch makeup and allowed to touch other people's faces. Part of their job was making sure nobody else. They literally created a little section of our non-dressing room that was only about the makeup. And so that's how we solved it. If anybody else, any other ideas on how to solve hair and makeup?
I mean, wigs too, right? Like that's different than being in people's spaces.
Right.
You could still be in charge of the wig maintenance.
Right, and then something I do is just do a formal introduction beforehand. These are the people who will be helping you with makeup. You have the option, you can do your own and check in with them, or you can have them do your makeup. You work that out yourselves, really putting that responsibility on the kid. Yeah?
For elementary, we just kind of have like
parents do it and one child who really wanted to do it as an option, and the kids can choose if they want a parent to do it or if they want another peer to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I never consider parents an option, but if you have those options, of course.
We kind of need it.
Yes, of course you do. Yes, and same thing with hair, right? These are the people that are going to be helping you with hair. If you're comfortable, great. If not, not. The other thing I do want to say is when we are endowing these kids with these roles and responsibilities, I make a formal meeting where I say, this is your person for this. This is your person for this. This is who you come to for this. Lots of times it's like lots of applause and welcome, and it's a very sort of necessary step to have the cast understand that they have now grown into a bigger ensemble, and we are welcoming these people into the universe of our play. That being said, I do want to set a little space for tensions you might feel in doing this. It is not always easy to hand over a job. Understood. It is not always easy to say, hey kid, I don't know if I trust you, but here is your responsibility, right? So I do want to open up time and space to talk about that if it's necessary, if you're feeling it. You can also pop it on a Post-it and put it on the parking lot over there, and I can address it that way. Yeah?
I think one of my concerns is in middle school, like I've had former students from Rev come say, well, I learned A, B, and C, I want to do this for drama club and after school, can we lead? Which is great because they're aware of all these other jobs. In middle school, we don't have the time to kind of break down these jobs and to give a 6th, 7th, or 8th grader tasks. Like, how would we go about, besides forms, right? Go about kind of giving them a little bit of example or sample of all of these different kinds of opportunity. And it's something you definitely want to introduce to the children, because then they get to go to art schools like Rev, and then they learn. I've had so many 8th graders leave my school and get to repertory and don't want to perform anymore because all they want to do is work backstage.
That makes me so happy.
Seriously. So how can we introduce all of this?
I would say look at your own needs first. What do you need help with? What can you, as your own director, producer, everything, delegate down? And then start there, right? So what's one thing that you can say, this kid can handle this? It's also why I like breaking it down into the 4 phases, and then within those 4 phases, looking at the 4 design areas. So is there a way that you can just ask a kid to help with costumes? Not do anything major, but just help me with costumes. And then, if that kid does it well, say, okay, you are now the costume head, here's the list of things I want to do. So I would say for you, it would be just thinking about where can you delegate and what can you break down, and having that list ready so that you say, here you go, right? Yeah?
So like going off of that, just like thinking about it in the terms of costumes, right? I don't have a costume shop, I don't have a costume room, I don't have anything. Like my costume shop is Amazon and anything that I purchase or steal from my husband's closet for my kids. So like that's my costume shop. So like in that sense, like if I'm like, okay, I can trust this student who has interest in this, like how am I going to now say, okay, these are the costumes I need. Where is that student going to get it? They can't come home with me. I'm not giving them my Amazon account. Like they can search for certain things, but then it's like, okay, like, then it still comes down to me having to purchase and still having to manage it. So like, for me, I feel like to have that extra person is just kind of like it's like, yeah, you're setting it up, but I could do the same.
You want to do it yourself, right?
It's not that I want to do it myself. I just feel that like if I have the student doing it and it doesn't get done, it gets complicated because then they could be looking and getting certain things that, yes, I said to get A, B, and C, but they got D, E, and F instead, and then it becomes like, okay, I still have to do the work anyway.
Fair enough, and that's when you back up, right? And that's when you, might have to simplify for yourself, right? Maybe not everybody gets full costumes, but they change accessories. Right. And that's a whole other conversation with breaking, that's when you, in pre-production, break down the script of what can I handle? What do I need to do to make it simple for myself, but then maybe be able to delegate down. But if you bring in that box of your husband's clothes and pop it in front of the kid and say, go try this on, at least that's one step that they could come to you dressed. As opposed to, but yes, there is absolutely the understanding that this is a huge job for one person. And many times inviting the kid in does make it harder. I think the way to combat that is the pre-planning, is the pre-production, is I know that I want this character to be wearing this, and then I know that going in. And I know someone over here said that they can't really have those conversations until the director's in rehearsal and gives you more information. So again, that is where I find breaking down and taking things as they come, and then when you move into tech, if it hasn't been done and you know it hasn't been done, you're setting aside time. We've done costume parades where, okay, we're not rehearsing today, we are just going to take these 2 hours, and the kid is gonna take the notes, and that's their only job. Yeah, and then I wanna move on.
So at my school, I'm at a middle school, 100% of the show happens in class, which is, so I definitely delegate to students, but it's not so fixed, because you can't be like, oh, well, great, I'm the house manager. What are you doing for the 2 months that we don't need a house manager yet, right? So every student has to be kind of prepared to do every kind of job. Even if I'm a like medium-sized actor, I'm still not in every scene. And if we're not doing my scene today, I can't just like sit in class and wait for my scene. So therefore, I'm giving feedback as like an assistant director, or I'm thinking about the design for the scene. Like, even though I'm an actor, because it all has to happen in class, so everyone has to be engaged all the time.
Right, and you don't want kids sitting back doing nothing. I would wonder if at that point you can extend the title of house manager into the social media marketing, you know, like the category of what the butts and seats people all need to do, so they can be the people who are reaching out to parents, reaching out to the community. In terms, and this is a perfect segue for what we want to do next, is in terms of thinking about your kids and the jobs that you need and the jobs that they are capable of doing, setting expectations, as I was starting to talk about, is the thing that is going to enable success, right? So, and what I mean by that is being able to physically hand them a job description, or physically hand them a bullet point list of what your job entails. So a little bit of what we did here, right? If you are the house manager, you are A, training ushers. You are B, ready to pick up spills. You are C. So what I'm gonna ask you to do, we have about 15 minutes, and we could go back to our brainstorming sessions, but this is very much something that you are going to have to take home to your own students. What does the job description, think LinkedIn, right? What does the job description look like when you are hiring, quote unquote hiring, a house manager, a light board operator? Don't forget, the light board operator doesn't just press the button. They come into the building, they turn on the board, they check to see everything is working. If something's broken, they panic and run to you, and they get the ladder out, ideally, right? And if you have a tech program, they get the ladder out and they jump up and fix it. So what I'm going to ask you to do for the next 10 to 15 minutes is go ahead and write your LinkedIn job description. Could be bullet points, whatever works for you, but ideally, and I hope we'll have time to share these, ideally I would love for you to walk out of this room with 3 or 4 jobs that you can hand to a student, job descriptions that you can hand to a student, and say, this is your responsibility while you're in class with me, while we're rehearsing the show, while you are while you're not rehearsing, you are also the blank. Here's what you need to be doing. Hopefully that will free up a little bit of your sort of headspace, that you're not having to occupy 35 kids and rehearse 15 others. That you can give them what their job is and they could go off and do it. Doesn't happen right away, but you can certainly build up to that. Questions? Comments?
Can we make like bullet points for them? Yeah, and I'm not saying that that's a great solution, but it's the one I have that's worked for me. Now, like I said, we're just getting back into full productions with after post-COVID, so there's this new safety job that sounds exciting. I know I have some hypochondriacs that want to give everyone hand sanitizer.
Is that enough though?
No,
because that's the other side of this equation is like, Miss, I'm done after 2.5 seconds, and you're like, okay, well, how do we fill the other 35 minutes? Right. But that's why I'm like giving the time now to really sort of cash out a broader heading or a broader title, and then just a checklist. Like, did you do this? Great. Did you do this? And then there's also allowing time for feedback, right? I see you made this list. I think you need to get a little bit more specific. Who's doing what during what scene, or however you want to break it down.
Yeah. Write something in them. Like, I don't give them the hard copy scripts. I actually type it out into an 8-page, really small font script.
Our process is as a character and why we want that costume to be like that, because we thought about our character in those kinds of ways.
Well, and even like the pre-production work, like maybe this isn't the best way, but I don't decide like what I want before the show starts, because I let that emerge out of rehearsal a little bit, like what's working well in rehearsal, or like rehearsal's a big experiment, and like I'm halfway through the rehearsal process and like that, and we're only just starting to like decide about set stuff, because in the first like round of rehearsals it was like, well, the stage could be anything, like what do you feel like, I don't know. In the November PD there was a session about power, but it was about like stage picture power, and like there was a table and there were chairs, and it was like, if you move this, how does that change the power dynamic in the image? And my kids love that as a directing process. So like we run a scene and it's like, okay, now what if like you entered from over there, or what if like the stage was like this, and it can change everything. So I guess it's flexible. I don't know. It's harder in a way.
Yeah, that's great. Like that's how I started this year, like trying to be more like that. But I think like for the students that I'm with, like it's just hard to get them to buy in and like take ownership of things. Like if I'm not directly the one rehearsing with them, like in the moment, they're just like doing nothing on the side. Even if I'm like, okay, rehearse, like, you know, we should be over here in this group or whatever, doing this or whatever, and they just kind of like do whatever, and I don't know if it's because it's like not clear enough like what they're supposed to be doing. So I'm really, and I've been like trying to get some of them to step up more and be like stage managers or like student directors or whatever, but I think it hasn't been clear enough like what they're actually supposed to do. So I think like writing these checklists will be like a good thing for that. But then at the same time, there's like the motivation part of it where it's like, okay, but what do I get for doing this extra stuff?
Yeah.
Because they're very like grade motivated. And so it's like, okay, I guess I'll give you extra credit, but you already have an A, so can you just do it? Like, I don't really, I don't know, it's just such a weird difference from like how I experienced theater. Like, I just, and you have like very few resources to really make it like cool. So I think that's like, we have class in cafeteria, and then like, there's not really any costumes, we only get to use the stage like once in a while. The dance department is in there. We can't even have like our own public shows. Like it has to be incorporated into the winter and spring showcase, which is like all the arts departments in one and have like 45 minutes in that like slot. So it's just like a lot to manage and get them like engaged in something.
Are you doing a text for your rehearsal?
So last semester we did scenes from The Box by Lindsay Price and Frankenstein vs. the Horrendous Goo. I can't remember the player right now, but they were basically just like super simple, like middle school level. Just like vignette plays. We didn't even do the full thing. Just like each small group had like their own scenes, and that was like enough to handle for that semester.
For in-class engagement with rehearsal, one thing that I found that worked well this year was if you're group small, if you're working in small groups and breaking them up, like if your group feels like they're good with a scene or they're not sure like what to rehearse, they come up with a deleted scene, and then it helps. It's like fun for them, right? Because they're like, oh, cool. So we're like in our characters, but this is the like outtakes or deleted scene. But it is actually pushing their like engagement with their character. And it's doing the work of like backstory, all of that good character prep work. And it does end up showing the next time that they run the action scene, the backstory that they put into the scene. And it helps with like from a classroom management, like what is that group doing if they feel like they don't have anything to support.
Yeah.
And then another thing I found that like helps with classroom rehearsal, especially if you're breaking it up into like smaller groups or partner pairs, is to give them a menu of skill focuses to choose from. So like today I'm focused on my physicality or on my voice or on my character background, and they can just pick one for rehearsal. And so then they're more accountable to like instead of just going rehearse when they come back and it's like, okay, you chose physicality. What physicality thing did you work with? What did you try? How did it go? And then they have to kind of like work on that.
No, because they already showed.
This might be a really pedantic difference. Like, is it? Do you? But when you're kind of presenting it, when you're sort of, do you kind of go? So what we're doing is we're putting on this production. So we're going to, or is it? We're gonna. What we're going to do is we're going to discover what Macbeth, this play, is all about. And by doing that, and we're going to achieve that by putting on this play.
Right. I have year-long classes, so we definitely don't start with the production. And my first unit is like ensemble building, so that's first and foremost, and that's really exciting. But we do have to put on the school calendar just for like logistics reasons. The play's on the calendar, so they know it's coming up. But since it is all in class, I'm like, we're always discovering, you're always auditioning, and we're always learning theater through the process of producing.
I would love if anybody is able to share one of their job descriptions that they came up with over the course of these conversations. Something that you might go back into your school and ask a kid to do that is new, or that is a new job for a kid to do. Does anybody have anything that they came up with today?
I was just riffing off what they were talking about, but I was thinking about a wardrobe coordinator, because usually I control all of that. And I told someone this year that they'd be the wardrobe coordinator, but then they didn't do anything. But now I'm actually gonna bring it to them and have them kind of organize the costumes, kind of help me figure out the rest of the costumes, like take inventory on which characters have their costumes for.
So they're doing the breakdown, right? Yeah. They're making a running sheet, great. And we call that the wardrobe head professionally, right? And different from the costume crew, the wardrobe head is the fancy title you get when you work professionally. But so I've heard inventory, I've heard make a running sheet. I think you were saying something like taking measurements.
Yeah.
What else?
Yeah, sizes, and help communicate between the students and me with who needs costumes that are still kind of trying to find them.
Great. And I would hope that you can jot this down. We mentioned in the back putting it on a Google Classroom under the category costumes, right? And then under it says expectations for wardrobe head, list it. That way there is always that paper trail, there is always that ability to go back and say, oh, you know what you have to do next, right? And that kid is busy. In a perfect world, that kid would ask for an assistant, right? Because that's a big job. So maybe you could give 2 or 3 kids that position. But it sounds like you have someone who has worked up to the head title, and then the wardrobe crew is under that person, and ideally that wardrobe crew will work their way up in years to come in the wardrobe head position. Setting up, again, the expectation and letting them have the ownership or power, which is a lot of the words I saw over there. Achievements, the word power feels a little bit silly to me, so I'm looking for synonyms for it. But the idea that you are giving them a responsibility, and without you performing to your responsibility, the show won't be as great. because it's collaborative, right? And everybody around us has the same amount of responsibility. I have, and just to sort of revisit that conversations about tensions, you are always going to find kids who don't want to listen to other kids. That is always going to come up. And it's one of those things that if you, I mean, I'm happy to hear where you've encountered that and what you've done. I've had mediations, I've had sit downs, I've had to recall everybody together and say, just want to remind you, this is your stage manager, this is their job. This is your wardrobe head, this is their job. It takes a while for students to understand that their peers have more responsibility on their show and therefore more power. But they do get there. They do get to the place where that is understood, and it's repetition, it's show after show. How long did it take you to get there? I mean, we still deal with it.
It's like Groundhog Day. You have like 4 or 5 really good years and a really great class can do like a Herculean show with you because they're ready.
Mm-hmm.
And then they all graduate and your next company is lots of novices and you start small and you build it back up again.
And you have your paper trail, you have your Google Classroom that you could copy and paste from the first time and say, these are what a wardrobe head does in our school. And that's why I asked you to make it very specific to you, because your school is going to look very different from your neighbor's school from, down the block. Questions, concerns? I do need to shift into a sort of, what do we call, reflection protocol. But I do want to end it with your voices. So is there anything that came up or something you want to try or something else you want to share with the group? Yeah,
I have a question. This conversation is great when it's been a program that has been established. Mm-hmm. So I am starting now from scratch. Mm-hmm. So I'm just listening and trying to absorb all of these things. But my question is, where do you start when your program is starting?
So this is what we were just talking about. You start with your needs, what you absolutely need to make your show go. And then you drop down to your wants. And that's something that only you as the director, I'm assuming you're the director, is that right? You're doing your own show, your own program. That's only you as the director can establish. My need is that everybody is in a fully realized costume. Well, great. Then that's what you need, not what you want. I want, to purchase all brand new costumes. That's a different thing. So I would say when you are starting from scratch, you are opening that script for the first time. That's the pre-production. That's when you're breaking down your script. And you are looking at it for, what do I absolutely need to have to make the show go up in 2 months? Then you can drop down to what would be fantastic to have to make the show go up in 2 months. Those needs are your priority, right? That's where you are. Maybe I don't need lights. I could just do up and down with classroom lights. But I do want a set. So then there's where budget comes into the conversation, resources come into the conversation. Other departments, I was in a school where we were not allowed to ask another teacher for help. Fair enough, but so the needs are your priority, and then you bring in all the other things. And if delegating out to a kid is not a absolute need yet, that's fine. You're still establishing. You're still setting up for the kids what this is going to look like. Then you can slowly add on, delegate down. But it certainly doesn't have to be all kids all the time, right? If it's you and one other person, that's a start.